They called her Barren. They called the children unwanted. They called their family impossible. But when a ruthless landowner tried to destroy everything they had built, the people he considered worthless would become the very witnesses who brought him down. This unforgettable story proves that true strength is not found in wealth, power, or social status. It is found in kindness, loyalty, and the willingness to stand up for those who cannot stand alone. If that message speaks to you, please like this video. Share it with someone you care about. Leave your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more inspiring Western stories.
The feed store smelled like grain and fear. It always did on a Friday. The owner swept fresh sawdust over the dirt floor each week. But sawdust couldn't cover what really happened in that room. Folks came here when they'd run clean out of choices. You could smell that too. Della Mercer stood at the side of the room and waited for her name. She held her carpet bag in both hands. Everything she owned was inside it. A spare dress, a Bible with a cracked spine, $12 she'd counted 3 times that morning, the way you count a thing when it's all you have left. She was 33 years old. She kept her chin level. She had learned a long time ago that the world took whatever you offered it, so she offered it nothing. Della Mercer, the auctioneer, called. She walked up onto the low platform. She did not hurry. She did not shuffle. She set her bag down by her feet, careful, like she'd decided in advance exactly how she'd stand. The auctioneer cleared his throat. Widow, twice married, healthy. He paused. Everyone knew the next part was coming. No children, he said. Doctor's note says she can't have any. The room went quiet in a particular way. Not surprised. Decided. Bidding starts at $60. Nobody moved. A man up front studied his boots. 2 brothers in the 3rd row looked at each other and said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. 50 then, the auctioneer said. 50 for a woman who can run a house. Still nothing. Della looked at a spot on the back wall just above all their heads. She did not look at any single face. She had done that before at her first auction years ago. And she had learned that meeting their eyes only made it worse. So she watched the wall. She waited for the room to be done with her. 40. A man near the window spoke up. He wasn't unkind about it. That was almost the worst part. She's barren, he said. What's the good in that? No offense, ma'am. Della's jaw tightened. Just a little. Just for a second. Then she let it go. She had heard that word her whole life. Barren. Like she was a field that wouldn't grow. Like a person was only worth what could be taken out of it. 30, the auctioneer said. His voice had gone thin. 30. Anybody. The silence stretched. 20, that voice belonged to Cyrus Mott. He sat in the front, big hat, soft hands, the look of a man who bought things because he could. He said the number, like he was tossing a scrap to a dog. 20, he said again. And that's charity. Somebody in the back laughed. Della kept her eyes on the wall. She breathed in. She breathed out. Don't break, she told herself. Not here. Not for them. And then a chair scraped back. It happened slow. A man stood up in the very last row, and as he rose, the whole room seemed to shrink around him. He was huge, not fat-built, like a barn door, like something you'd lean a ladder against. His head nearly brushed the rafter. The laughing stopped. Della had heard about him. Everybody had. Amos Calder. They called him the Mountain. He ran the Calder Bar out east. And the story went that he'd been hired as a boy for nothing but the work his back could do. And nobody had bothered to learn anything else about him since. He didn't look at the auctioneer. He looked at her. And here was the thing. There was no pity in it. Della had spent her life learning the difference between a man who saw her and a man who saw what she could give him. She knew it the way you know weather. And this big man, standing in the back of a feed store, with his hat in his hand, was looking at her like she was a person. $1, Amos said. The room didn't laugh this time. The room didn't know what to do. $1. The auctioneer blinked. Mr. Calder, the bid's at 20. $1, Amos said again. Mott twisted in his seat. You're making a fool of yourself, Calder. Could be, Amos said. He set a single silver coin on the folding table by the door. It made a small flat sound, but I'll pay it, and I'd like a word with the lady outside. if she'll allow it. Nobody outbid $1. You couldn't. There was nowhere lower to go, and somehow that made it the only honest bid in the room. Della picked up her bag. Outside, the wind came off the flat land and pulled at her skirt. Amos stood a few feet off, giving her room, his hat still in his hand. For a big man, he took up his space careful, like he was always a little sorry for how much of it there was. You bid $1 on me, Della said, flat, testing him. I did. Folks in there think you bought a barren woman for a joke. Let them think it. He turned the hat in his hand. I didn't pay $1 to buy you, ma'am. A person doesn't have a price. Not 1 cent of one. I paid $1 to make that room shut its mouth. Della looked at him for a long moment. The wind moved between them. Why'd you sit in the back? She asked. Always do. He almost smiled. From the back, you can see the whole room. You can see who folks look at and who they look away from. She studied him. Whatever she'd braced for, it wasn't this. I won't make you promises about my heart, he said. I don't know my own heart well enough to, but I'll promise you respect, and I'll promise you honest. That's what I've got. You can take it or leave it, and I'll drive you wherever you mean to go either way. Della stood there in the cold, with everything she owned in one bag. For the first time in a long time, she let herself feel something she'd given up on. Not hope, exactly. She was too old for hope, but the possibility of it. Then let's go sign the papers, Mr. Calder, she said. She picked up the coin off the table herself on the way out. $1. She'd keep it the rest of her life. The wagon ride out to the Calder bar took most of the afternoon. Amos didn't talk much. Della was glad of it. She watched the land go by flat and brown and endless, the grass gone pale with cold, the sky pressing down on all of it like a hand. Now and then they passed a fence post leaning the wrong way. Now and then a hawk turned slow circles overhead. She kept her bag on her lap. She kept her thoughts to herself. She was good at that. About an hour in, Amos finally spoke. You warm enough? I'm fine. He reached behind the seat anyway and pulled out a wool blanket, old but clean, and held it out without looking at her, like he didn't want to make a thing of it. She took it. Thank you. Cold comes up off that ground after noon, he said. Folks always think it's the wind. It's the ground. That was the whole conversation for another mile. Della had ridden in a lot of wagons with a lot of men. She had learned to read them by how they drove. Some men gripped the reins like they wanted to punish the horses for being slow. Some men slouched and let the team wander and called it patient. Amos held the reins loose and easy, but the horses stayed straight as a plumb line. They knew who was driving. They just didn't have to be reminded. She filed that away. The ranch came up out of the flat like it had grown there. A big 2-story house, good timber gone gray, a porch that sagged a little on one side. Behind it, a bunkhouse, a barn, a few sheds in different states of falling down. Smoke came up thin and crooked from the kitchen chimney. A man was waiting on the porch with his arms crossed. He was old, 60, maybe more, weathered down to something like fence wood. He watched the wagon roll in, with the face of a man who had already made up his mind and was waiting to be proven right. That's Otis, Amos said, climbing down. He runs the hand. Been here longer than I have. Near enough. He came around to help Della down. She took his hand. It swallowed hers whole, and it was rough as bark, but he was careful with it. The way you'd be careful, lifting something you didn't want to drop. Otis looked her up and down. This is Mrs. Mercer, Amos said. She'll be running the house. Otis grunted. We had a woman run the house. Lasted till October. Della looked him dead in the eye. You're wondering how long I'll last, she said, and whether I know what I'm walking into, and whether you'll have to work around me, same as you've been, working around, having nobody. Otis blinked. The answer, she went on, I don't know, probably, and no. She picked up her bag. Where's the kitchen? There was a long pause. Otis looked at Amos. Amos gave him nothing. Just stood there, big and quiet, with the smallest something at the corner of his mouth. Otis looked back at her, through the front, past the stairs, all the way to the back. Thank you. She went up the steps and through the door and didn't look back. Behind her, she heard Otis say, Lowell, and Amos say, yep. The kitchen was the worst room in the house. Della stood in the middle of it and took it all in. The stove was a good one, cast iron, 10 years old maybe. Built to last, but around it, everything was a mess. Pots stacked without sense, a pantry near empty. A smell of old grease, and under that, something gone bad in a corner that nobody had bothered to find. She didn't get upset about it. Upset never cooked a meal. What was here could be fixed, and fixing it was just work, and she knew how to work. A girl appeared in the doorway, 15 maybe, red hair, and the jumpy look of someone who'd learned to stay out of the way. You cook in here, Della asked. Sometimes. The girl twisted her apron. I'm Nell. I mostly do wash. Otis puts me in here when there's nobody else. Can you cook? Not real good. That's all right. Nobody's born knowing. Della set her bag down by the door. I'll teach you. It's not hard. It's just particular. She opened the pantry and started counting. What do the men eat in the morning? Biscuits. Mostly. They ain't very good. They come out heavy. You measuring the soda or going by feel? Nell looked startled, like she hadn't expected a question with an answer. By feel, whoever's making them. That's your trouble right there. Della closed the pantry. Going by feel works for the one who's got the feel. Then that person leaves, and it all falls apart. You build a thing so it works without any one person being there. That's how you keep it. She glanced at the girl. Tomorrow I'll show you the ratio. Write it down somewhere. A thing written down belongs to everybody. A thing in your head only belongs to you. Nell nodded slow, like she was hearing something she'd remember. Now, Della said, there's 20 men out there who'll want supper. And what's been happening isn't enough. Show me where everything is. Then stay out from underfoot while I figure out what's possible. They worked through the kitchen together. By the time they were done, something had shifted in the girl. She still watched Della carefully, but the scared had gone out of it. What was left was closer to paying attention. That was a start. You couldn't ask for more than a start. On the first day, supper went on the long table at 7. It wasn't fancy. There wasn't time or food for fancy. But it was hot, and it was organized, and it was a good sight, better than what these men had been choking down. Salt pork browned right instead of boiled gray. Cornbread cooked at the proper heat. Potatoes picked through, so only the good ones made it to the plate. The hands filed in. Chairs scraped. Tin clinked. And then it got quieter than usual, the kind of quiet that happens when men notice something and don't want to say so out loud. Amos sat at the head of the table. Della sat at the far end, where she could see the whole room. She ate without talking. She listened to the shape of it. Instead, who talked, who didn't, who the others leaned toward, who sat quiet and watchful in the corner. You learned a household by listening to it eat. Otis sat near Amos and said nothing about the food. Della had already worked out that this was how he gave a compliment. When it was over, an old hand stopped by where she was clearing plates. Bowed legs, hands like saddle leather. A man who'd been riding since before most of the others were born. That was a fine supper, ma'am, he said. Thank you. No fuss, no false modesty. Just taking it the way it was given. He nodded once and went out to the bunkhouse, and she heard the door shut behind him. Her room was upstairs, across the hall from his. It was plain but decent. A good bed, a washstand, a window that looked out east over the dark. Somebody had laid a quilt across the bed, old, but well made. The kind of thing that gets kept because it meant something to somebody once. She sat on the edge of the bed and pulled off her boots and set them by the door. Then she sat a minute with her hands in her lap. She let herself be still, which she hadn't done all day. There was a knock, soft for such a big man. It's open, she said. Amos stood in the doorway. He didn't come in. He had a way of stopping at the edge of a room, like he wasn't sure he had the right to take up the space inside it. The quilt, he said. That was Clara's, my first wife. He turned his hat in his hands. The man was always turning that hat. I wasn't thinking when I had Nell put it in here. If it bothers you, I'll have it taken out. Della looked at it, then at him. It doesn't bother me, she said, and it was true. But she heard what he was really doing, and it surprised her. He was asking, not telling. A man in his own house, asking a woman he'd known 6 hours whether a quilt was all right. A quilt's a quilt, she said. It kept me warm. Leave it, he nodded. But he didn't leave yet. I want to say a thing plain, he said, so there's no guessing later. You've got the run of this house, real run of it. The kitchen, the stores, the help, the money that goes through it. Not the kind of run a man gives a woman and then takes back when it suits him. The real thing. Anybody on this place gives you trouble about it. They answer to me, and then they're gone. Della watched him, and, in return, honest work, honest dealing. You tell me the truth when something's going wrong, even when it's me that's wrong. A pause. Especially then, most men don't want a wife who tells them they're wrong. Most men are wrong a lot, Amos said. I'm wrong as much as any of them. I just don't have anybody around brave enough to say so. Place falls apart that way. Slow. You don't notice till the roof's down. Something moved in Della's chest. She kept it off her face. I'll tell you the truth, she said. It's all I've got worth giving. But I'll tell you something first. She looked at him straight. I was married twice. The first man wanted son. I gave him 7 years and no children. And he died disappointed in me. Like that was a thing I'd done to him on purpose. The second one, she stopped. The second one I won't talk about, except to say he showed me real clear the difference between a man who sees you and a man who only sees what you're supposed to hand over. The wind pushed at the window. I'm done being the second kind of thing, she said. If that's what this is, you can drive me back tomorrow. I'll keep your dollar, and we'll call it square. Amos was quiet a long moment. My whole life, he said slowly, folks have looked at me and seen one thing, a big back, something to carry, something to lift, something to put between them, and trouble. I got hired at 11 for the work my body could do. And far as most people are concerned, that's still all I am. A mountain, not a man. He looked down at his hat. I know what it is to be measured by one part of yourself. You by your belly. Me by my shoulder. He looked up. Not under this roof. Not with me. That's the one promise I know I can keep. Della didn't say anything. She didn't trust her voice to come out steady. Good night, Mrs. Mercer, he said. Good night, Mr. Calder. He pulled the door to, gentle, and she heard his heavy steps go down the hall. Della sat in the dark a while. Then she got up, and instead of going to bed, she did something she hadn't planned. She went to the window and looked out east at the black flatland and the cold stars over it. And she thought about a man who sat in the back of rooms so he could see who got looked away from. She had spent her whole life being one of those people, the ones folks looked away from. She didn't know yet if this would work. She was too old to know things like that, for sure. But she pulled the quilt up over her shoulders. Clara's kept because it had mattered to somebody. And for the first time, in longer than she could rightly remember, Della Mercer slept the whole night through. By the end of the first month, the Calder Bar was a different place, not all at once. Good things don't come all at once. They come the way frost leaves the ground in spring slow and from the bottom up, so you don't notice till one morning you look, and it's gone. The biscuits came out light, the pantry filled. The men started showing up to supper washed, which nobody had told them to do, but which happens on its own when the food's worth respecting. The house got warmer, too, and not just because Della found the drafts and stuffed them. A house takes on the feeling of whoever runs it. This one had been cold a long time. Now it wasn't. Amos noticed. He didn't say so, but he started coming in for breakfast and sitting at the kitchen table instead of eating, standing up at the counter like he had for years. He'd sit there with his coffee while she worked the dough, and they'd talk a little, or not. And neither way was wrong. You're up early, he said, one morning. I'm always up early. She didn't turn around. The potato barrel in the back, about a third of it's turning. Pull the bad ones today, or you'll lose the lot by next week. All right. And the lard's near gone. Whoever ordered last didn't count on winter. You'll want twice what's coming, feeding this many men through to spring. I'll tell Otis. I already wrote him a list. It's on the table. She glanced back. He pushed back on two things. Came and found me about it. Amos raised an eyebrow. And he was right about one. I was right about the other. She shrugged. We sorted. That's how it's supposed to go. Amos drank his coffee and looked at her, like he was working something out. He did that a lot, she'd noticed. Looked at her like the picture he'd had of her was wrong and he was busy fixing it. She found she didn't mind. A man revising you was a sight better than a man who'd decided what you were and quit looking. Cyrus Mott came calling on a Tuesday. He rode up in the middle of the afternoon, soft hands, and a good coat, with two men behind him who didn't say anything. He didn't get down off his horse. That told Della something all by itself. Amos came out of the barn, wiping his hand. Calder, Mott said. He looked up at the house. He looked at the fresh painted porch rail and the smoke coming up steady from the chimney. Place is looking lively. Heard you found yourself a housekeeper at the exchange. He smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. Dollar well spent, I hear. Something I can do for you, Mott. Just being neighborly. Mott's horse shifted. That creek of yours. The one runs down off the north pasture. Comes a dry year, water. Like that's worth more than the land it crosses. I'd pay fair for the rights. Fairer than fair. It's not for sale. Everything's for sale, Calder. Mott's smile widened. It's just a question of whether a man knows his price. Some men don't. They find out the hard way. He gathered his rein. You think on it. He turned his horse and rode off, his two quiet men behind him. Della had heard the whole thing from the porch. That man wants your water, she said when Amos came up. That man wants everything, Amos said. Water's just what he wants today. He'll be back. He always is. Amos looked off down the road where the dust was still settling. Cyrus Mott's been buying up this county for years. Distressed farms. Mostly he waits for folks to get desperate. Then he turns up looking generous, his jaw set. I've watched him do it to better men than me. I don't aim to be next. Della looked at him a moment. Then she went inside and started a pot of coffee, because that was the thing she could do. And doing the thing you could do was always better than fretting over the thing you couldn't. The boy came 3 days later. Otis found him first, in the hay barn, curled up in a corner like a barn cat. He couldn't have been more than 7. Dark hair, dark eyes, a face gone hollow from not eating. Half Lakota, anybody could see. His people had been moved off their land the winter before, and there'd been sickness, and somewhere in all of it, this one had been left to drift like a leaf off a tree. Word got to town before noon. It always did. By supper, 2 men had ridden out from Calhoun Flats. One of them was a clerk with the county. The other was just a man who liked to be where things happen. There's an agency takes in the Indian children, the clerk said, standing in the yard with his hat on. He wouldn't come up on the porch. Up north. We'll take him off your hands. It's the proper way. The boy was inside. Della had washed his face and put a bowl of stew in front of him, and he was eating it the way a starved thing eats, fast and quiet, one eye on the door. Amos stood on the porch and looked down at the clerk for a long moment. He's eating, Amos said. That's not the point, Mr. Calder. It's exactly the point. Amos came down 1 step. He didn't raise his voice. He never did. He didn't have to. What blood runs in that boy is no business of this town's, and it's no business of yours. He's a child. He's hungry, and he's got nobody. And he's sitting at my table eating my wife's stew. He stopped. Children need a home. That's the start and the end of it. There's nothing in between that matters. The clerk shifted. Folks won't like it. Folks don't have to like it, Amos said. It's not folks, boy. It's not your boy. Ride on home. The clerk opened his mouth. Then he looked at the size of the man on the steps and the stillness in him, and he shut it again. He put his hat on, and the 2 of them rode off. That night, after the boy was asleep upstairs in a bed, for the first time in who knew how long, Amos sat on the porch and stared out at the dark. Della came and sat beside him. His boots are done for, she said, worn clean through. I'll stitch them tonight. Won't be pretty, but they'll hold him till we get him new one. Amos didn't answer right away. My folks died when I was small, he said finally. I went where the work was. Stables. Mostly. Nobody asked my name, just asked, could I lift it? He turned his hat in his hand. I had 100 meals at 100 tables, where I was let to eat in the corner, the kitchen corner, like a dog they kept for the mice. He shook his head slow. I swore if I ever had a table of my own, nobody'd eat in the corner of it. Della was quiet. Tomorrow, Amos said, the boy eats at the head of the table, with us, where everybody can see him. He looked at her. Is that all right? You're asking me again? She said softly. It's your house, too. Della looked out at the dark. Somewhere, a coyote called and went quiet. What's his name? She asked. Boy says it's Sam. Says it's what the missionary called him. Won't say the other one, the real one. Then we'll call him Sam, Della said, and we'll let him keep the real one for himself. for when he's ready. A name belongs to the one it's hung on, not to us. Amos nodded. He looked at her like he was revising the picture again. You're a strange woman, Mrs. Mercer. I've been called worse. She stood and brushed off her skirt. I'm going to go stitch a boy's boots. She went inside. Through the window, Amos watched her light the lamp and bend over the small worn boots with a needle, her face quiet and sure in the yellow light. He sat out a while, longer in the cold. Then he went in, too, because the house was warm now, and it was his. And for the first time in a long time, there was a reason to go inside it. The town didn't take kindly to the boy. Della found that out for herself the next time she went into Calhoun Flats for supplies. She'd been getting friendly nods for a few weeks. Folks had started to come around to the idea of her, the capable woman out at the Calder place, the one who'd turned that broken-down ranch into some. People will forgive you almost anything once you've proven useful to them. But the nods stopped that morning. She felt it before she understood it. The way the women at the dry goods counter went quiet when she came in. The way old Agnes Durant, who ran the talk of that town, the way a foreman runs a crew, looked at her over her spectacles and then looked away. Slow, so Della would be sure to see it. Della bought her flour and her soda and her thread. She paid. She said thank you. And she walked out with her back straight and her chin level because she'd be hanged before she let any of them see it land. But it landed. It landed all the way home. She told Amos about it at the kitchen table that night. After the children, there was only Sam then, but already the word children was forming in her mouth. We're in bed. They've turned cold on me, she said, over the boy. Amos set down his coffee. Figured they might. Agnes Durant cut me dead at the counter. Della worked a knot of thread loose. 60 years, that woman's been telling that town what to think. And now she's decided what to think about us. You sorry we kept him? Della looked up sharp. No. She said it like a door shutting. I'm not sorry. I'm just telling you the cost of it. A thing can be right and still cost you. Those are two different questions. And folks get entangled up all the time. Is it right? And what'll it cost me? They answer the second one and call it the first. She pulled the thread tight. I answered the first one weeks ago. I just wanted you to know the bill's coming. Amos was quiet a moment. My grandmother used to say a thing, he said. She said, the right road and the easy road only run together by accident. Don't go looking for the both of them in one. Smart woman she was. He turned his cup. She also said, folks who throw stones at a thing they don't understand are mostly just scared of looking foolish. Easier to be cruel than to admit you were wrong about something. Della thought about that, about Agnes Durant looking away slow. We'll see, she said. Sam didn't talk much those first weeks. He watched everything. He flinched when a hand was raised too fast, even just to wave. He ate like the food might be taken back. It broke something in Della to see it. But she didn't let it show, because the boy didn't need her pity. He needed her steady. So she was steady. She gave him small job, carrying eggs, filling the woodbox. Nothing hard, just things. So he'd learn that in this house, a person had a place. And the place was real. The first time he filled that woodbox, without being asked, she made sure to notice it out loud. That's good work, Sam, she said. I see you did that on your own. The boy looked at her, like she'd handed him something. Then he looked at the floor. But the next morning, the woodbox was full again. And one afternoon, she sat him down at the kitchen table with a slate and a nub of chalk. You know your letter, she asked. He shook his head. Wanted to. He thought about it. Then he nodded. Slow, like he was admitting to something. All right, she drew an A. This one's first. It makes a sound like ah. She put the chalk in his hand. His fingers were stiff with it. Now he drew a shaky line. Then another. It didn't look like much. That's it, Della said. That's exactly it. Nobody draws it pretty the first time. You think I drew mine pretty. She leaned in. Listen to me, Sam. There's folks in this world will tell you what you can and can't learn. They'll look at the color of you and decide it for you before you've tried. They'll be wrong every time. A mind doesn't know what color it's sitting behind. A mind just wants to be fed. She tapped the slate. So we're going to feed yours every day. And someday, you'll read a thing that nobody thought you'd ever get to read. and you'll know they were wrong all along. Sam looked at the wobbly letter he'd made. Then he drew it again. Better this time. It was Sam who led her to Tess. The boy had taken to wandering, careful, the edges of the property. One evening, he came back and tugged Della's sleeve and wouldn't let go until she followed him. He led her down the creek to the Pettit place, a poor scrape of a farm that bordered the Calderland. And there, sitting alone in the dirt behind the chicken coop, was a girl. She was maybe 8, thin. Her dress was filthy, and her hair was a snarl. She was building something out of stones, lining them up by size, careful, her whole face bent down into the work. She didn't look up when they came near, not because she was rude, because she didn't hear them. "Hello," Della said. Nothing. The girl kept lining up her stone. Della crouched down. She waved her hand into the girl's line of sight, slow so as not to scare her. The girl looked up then. Her eyes were sharp, quick, not simple at all. Della's face, reading it the way you read a thing when reading faces is all you've got. She's the Pettit girl. It was Mrs. Pettit. Come out onto the step, wiping her hand. Tired voice. Tired everything. "Tess, she's deaf, born that way. Doctor says she's simple too, but I don't." The woman stopped. "We can't hardly feed the ones that work. And she don't work, just sits." Della looked back down at the girl. At the stones, lined up perfect by size. Smallest to biggest, not one of them out of place. "She's not simple," Della said. "Doctor said the doctor's wrong." Della said it plain. No heat in it, just fact. "Look at what she's built. That's not a simple child's work. That's a child who thinks in order. She can't hear you, so you never found the door into her. That's all. There's a person in there, same as anybody. She's just behind a window instead of a door. And nobody's bothered to learn how to knock." She looked up at Mrs. Pettit. "Will you let me try?" The woman looked at her daughter, sitting in the dirt. Something crossed her face. Shame, maybe, or just plain exhaustion. "You want to try?" she said. "You try. Lord knows I'm out of ways." It started slow. Della had seen deaf folks before. There'd been a man in Hastings, years back, who talked with his hands, and she'd watched him do it the way you watch anything you don't understand but can't look away from. She didn't know his language, but she knew the idea of it, that you could make words with your hand, that a thing didn't have to be heard to be said. So she made it up as she went, and Tess made it up with her. A flat hand on the chest, patted twice. "Me." A point. "You." Hands cupped to the mouth and out. "Eat." They invented a sign for water, for cold, for the boy Sam, for the big man. Amos Tess made that one herself, both arms stretched up tall, and Della laughed out loud the first time, because it was perfect. The girl learned fast, faster than fast, like a field that had been waiting years for somebody to plant it. And here was the thing Della understood. Watching her, Tess had always been this bright. The brightness had been there the whole time, sitting behind that window, while the world walked past and called her empty. The girl hadn't been broken. The world had just been too lazy to learn her language, and then blamed her for the silence. Amos built a chair. He didn't say much about it. He just disappeared into the barn for 2 evenings, and on the third there was a small chair at the kitchen table, sized for a child, sanded smooth. "For the Pettit girl," he said, "when she come." Because Tess came most days now. Mrs. Pettit didn't fight it. A child she couldn't feed, fed at the Calder table, taught things by the Calder woman. It cost her nothing, and gained her a daughter who came home with light in her face. She let it happen, and the household learned to sign. Della made them, Otis grumbled. But Della stood over him until he learned eat and more and good. And the first time he signed good at Tess across the supper table, and the girl's whole face opened up. The old man had to look away and clear his throat about something. "Why's everybody waving their hands at the deaf girl?" Nell asked. "Because a person shouldn't have to sit alone at the table they're eating at," Della said. "It's the loneliest thing in the world, Nell, to be in a room full of people and have not one of them able to talk to you. We're not going to do that to her, so we all learn, all of us. That way, she's never the one left out. The room changes to fit her. She doesn't have to break herself to fit the room." Nell thought about that. Then she went and asked Tess how to sign her own name. It was a hard winter and a good one, both at once. The town stayed cold. Agnes Durant kept up her cutting. There were whispers about the half Lakota boy, About the deaf girl, about the barren woman who couldn't have her own, so she went around collecting other folks. Della heard them sideways, the way you always do. She let them slide off, mostly. But late one night, a bad storm came through. The kind that comes off the plains with no warning, that turns the dark white and howling. Some of the cattle drifted, and Amos and the hands rode out into it, and they were gone long enough that Della stood at the window with her heart in her throat. When Amos came back, he was half frozen and bleeding from where a steer had caught him against a post. Della sat him down by the fire and cleaned the cut and wrapped it, and her hands weren't quite steady. And they both noticed. You were scared, Amos said. I was not. You were. He caught her wrist, gentle, in that huge, careful hand. It's all right. I was scared, too, of leaving you all here alone. Della went still. The fire popped. Stick. 2 children slept, who 6 months ago had nobody. And here was this great mountain of a man, looking up at her with a thing in his eyes she'd spent her whole life being told she wasn't worth. Don't, she said, quiet. Don't say a thing you can't stand behind. I don't say things I can't stand behind. He let go of her wrist. That's the one thing I've always been able to do. I just say them slow. He went up to bed. Della sat by the fire a long time. On the mantel, in a tin cup, sat a silver dollar. She'd put it there weeks ago without quite knowing why. She picked it up, turned it over. $1. The price of a barren widow, the town would say. She set it back in the cup. Outside the window, near the foundation where the snow had drifted, something white had come loose, a corner of paper, frozen into the wood, fluttering in the last of the storm. She'd dig it out come spring and find it was an old letter, water-stained, half a name still readable. But that was spring's trouble. Tonight she banked the fire and climbed the stairs and slept under Clara's quilt, in a house that had been cold for years and wasn't anymore. Spring came the way it always did out there, late, and then all at once, the ground softened. The creek came up. Green crept back into the pale grass, and the cattle that had made it through grew fat and slow. Sam could read whole sentences now. Tess had 100 signs and was inventing more faster than the household could keep up. The Calder bar was, by any honest measure, thriving, which is usually right about when trouble comes looking. It came up the road on a warm afternoon in the shape of 2 children. They were black, a boy and a girl, the boy maybe 12, and the girl a little younger. They were thin to the bone and gray with road dust, and they stopped at the edge of the yard like they'd hit a fence they couldn't see. The boy put himself half in front of the girl. Old habit that Della knew it on sight. She came down off the porch slow, wiping her hands. You've come a long way, she said. The boy didn't answer. His eyes went around the yard, the barn, the bunkhouse, Amos coming out of the stable, the size of him counting exits, the way a thing counts exits when it's been hunted. Nobody here's going to hurt you, Della said. You hungry? That word did it. The girl's face cracked just for a second, before the boy's hand found her shoulder and steadied her. We don't want trouble, ma'am, the boy said. His voice was older than 12. We're just passing. Heard there might be work. We'll work for food. We're not asking for charity. What are your names? A pause. Kay. This here's my sister Junie. Our folks, he stopped. He didn't finish it. He didn't have to. Their folks had been freed, and then there'd been nowhere to go, and no one to go to, the way it was for so many in those years, free on paper and starving in the road. All right, Kaylee, Della said. All right, Junie, you'll work, since you'd rather. We can always use hands. She turned toward the house. But you'll eat first. A body can't work on nothing. Come on in. The town heard about it by the next morning. This time, they didn't send a clerk. This time, a half-dozen men rode out, and Cyrus Mott rode at the front of them. He stopped his horse in the yard, and the others fanned out behind him. And he looked down at Amos with that same soft smile that never went anywhere near his eyes. Calder, he said, here you're collecting strays again. Amos came out and stood in the middle of his own yard, big and unhurried, and said nothing. First the Indian, Mott went on. Now this, a whole little family of misfits out here. He shook his head, slow like a man disappointed in a child. It's not natural, Calder. Folks are talking. A man's got to think about his standing. I don't recall asking what folks are talking about. You should. Standing's worth something out here. More than water, even. Mott's smile tightened. A man without standing, when hard times come and they come fines, nobody'll lift a finger for. Banks, neighbors, nobody. He stands alone. And a man standing alone is awful easy to push over. The men behind him shifted in their saddle. Della had come out onto the porch. Behind her, in the doorway, 4 children stood close together, Sam, Tess, and the 2 new ones, Cale, with his arm around his sister. Mott looked at them. He looked at them a long moment, and something moved in his face that wasn't quite a smile anymore. That's a strange-looking brood for a barren woman, he said. The yard went still. Amos took 1 step forward, just 1. But the whole yard seemed to lean with it. You'll want to ride on now, Mott, he said, quiet, almost friendly, while I'm still of a mind to let you. For a second, nobody moved. Then Mott laughed, short and false, and gathered his rein. Think on your standing, Calder, he said, turning his horse. Storm's coming, always is. Best know who'll be standing with you when it does. They rode off in a string of dust. That night, Della couldn't settle. She'd put the children to bed, 4 of them now, in the big house, and the rooms didn't feel empty anymore. She'd checked the doors twice. She stood at the kitchen window and looked out at the dark, and turned the silver dollar over and over in her fingers without noticing she was doing it. Amos came in. He stood at the edge of the kitchen, the way he did. You're winding yourself up, he said. That man, Della, set the dollar down. He didn't come about strays. He came to threaten you and call it neighborly. Standing. Storms. He's telling you he's going to make trouble and dressing it up like a sermon. I know what he was doing. What did he mean? Family property. No, he didn't say that. She frowned. But it was under there, the way he looked at me. She turned around. Amos, what was my second husband's name? I never told you. Amos went quiet in a particular way. Porter, he said slowly. Emmett Porter, folks said. And Mott's first name, Cyrus. And before Mott bought up half this county under his own name, Della said, what was the family that ran it? A long pause. The Porters, Amos said. The fire ticked in the stove. My second husband, Della said, very quiet, was Cyrus Mott's brother. She watched it land on him, watched him put it together. Slow, the way he put everything together. He thinks I'm his, she said, or the bit of me that was his brother's. Anyhow, like a piece of furniture left over from a dead man's house. That's what that look was. He doesn't want the water, or he wants the water. But that's not all of it. He wants the land my dead husband signed away. And he wants, she made herself say it, he wants to put me back where I belong, which is under a porter's roof, with the porter's name, doing what I'm told. Amos crossed the kitchen. He didn't stop at the edge of the room this time. He came all the way in, and he stood in front of her, and he took both her hands in his great, careful ones. You listen to me, he said. You don't belong to a dead man. You don't belong to that smiling snake who rode out of here today. You don't belong to anybody. He held her hands tight. A person isn't property. Wasn't ever supposed to be. That's the whole rotten lie at the bottom of men like Mott, that a body can be owned. A woman, a man, a child. Bought, sold, kept, willed off to a brother like a horse. His voice didn't rise, but something burned under it. It's a lie. It was always a lie. And I'd burn this whole place to the ground before I'd let him make it true under my roof. Della looked up at him. Her eyes stung, which she hated. I told you not to say things you can't stand behind, she whispered. I'm standing behind this one, Amos said. I'll stand behind it the rest of my life. And then, finally, after all the careful weeks, he kissed her. It was clumsy. He was a man who'd spent 40 years not being touched. And it showed, but it was real, and it was honest. And Della, who had been married twice, and loved not once, kissed him back like a woman finding water after a long, dry road. On Sunday, the family went to church, all of them. Amos in his one good coat, Della in her dark dress, and 4 children scrubbed and combed and walking in a row. The whole town watched them come up the road. You could feel it, the watching, the held breath of a place that didn't know what to do with what it was seeing. Reverend Hollis was a young man, but he had a steadiness. He watched the Calder family file into a pew at the back, watched the way the rest of the congregation drew in their skirts and their shoulders, and something set in his jaw. When he climbed up to preach, He didn't preach what he'd planned. "There's folks in this room," he said, looking at that pew in the back and feeling something curdle in them. I'll name it. It's the feeling that some children belong and some don't, that a body's worth is set by blood or color or where they came from or what a doctor wrote on a page. He let that sit. "I want to tell you where that feeling comes from. It doesn't come from God. It comes from men who found it useful to decide that some folks were less so they could take more." His voice stayed level. "Freedom isn't a gift we hand down to the lesser, brothers and sisters. There's no lesser. Freedom is a thing we hand back to the people it was stolen from in the first place. And every soul in that back pew has had something stolen. A home, a people, the right to be heard, the right to be called a person instead of a thing." He looked out at, "We can keep stealing, or we can start handing back. That's the only sermon worth preaching this morning." The church was dead silent. In the back pew, Cale sat very straight, his arm around Junie. Sam had Tess's hand, and Tess, who couldn't hear a word of it, watched the Reverend's face and then turned and watched Della's and read in it everything that mattered. Afterward, on the steps, an old woman stopped in front of Della. It was Agnes Durant. The two women looked at each other. 60 years of telling that town what to think, standing in front of the woman everyone had been talking about. "That's a well-behaved brood," Agnes said stiffly. "It cost her something. You could see it cost her. They're good children," Della said. "Thank you." Agnes looked at the four of them. Her hard old face did something complicated. "My sister had a deaf boy," she said. "A long time ago, folks called him simple. He wasn't." She stopped, like she'd surprised herself. "He wasn't simple at all. Nobody, just she didn't finish." She pressed her lips together. "That girl, the hands you do. Could a body learn that?" "Anybody can learn it," Della said. "I could teach you." Agnes nodded once, sharp, and went down the steps. But it was a different nod than the one she'd given at the dry goods counter. Everybody on those church steps saw it. And in a town like that, Agnes Durant, nodding civil at the Calder woman, did more than any sermon could. That night, there were 6 at the supper table, Amos and Della, and 4 children, and a 7th chair stood empty against the wall, the small one Amos had built, waiting. Della looked at it across the warm kitchen. She didn't know yet how many that table would hold before they were through, but she was starting to have an idea. Mott didn't write out again. He did something worse. He sent paper. It came by way of a lawyer's clerk in a buggy. A thin, folded document tied with string, the kind of thing that hides its teeth inside polite words. Della read it at the kitchen table while Amos stood over her shoulder. And the longer she read, the stiller she got. "What's it say?" Amos said. "It says your land isn't all yours." She kept her eyes on the page. 43 acres along the north line. The piece the creek runs through. He claims it was never properly titled. Claims it still belongs to the old Porter holdings, which means it belongs to him now, since he bought up everything the Porters left. That's a lie. I've run cattle on that ground for 18 years. Running cattle on it and holding the title to it are 2 different things in a courtroom. Della set the paper down. "And there's worse. There's a note in here. A debt. Says my husband, Emmett Porter, borrowed against that land before he died. Says the debt fell to me when he passed, and to you when you married me." She looked up. "He's not just coming for the land, Amos. He's coming through me to get it. He's saying I brought a debt into this house like a dowry of rot." Amos was quiet a long moment. "Did Porter borrow against anything?" "Emmett Porter, never 2 honest dollars to rub together," Della said. "He borrowed against everything, but not that land. He didn't own that land. He couldn't have signed it away because it was never his to sign." She frowned down at the document. "This note's a forgery. I'd stake my life on it. The trouble isn't whether it's true. The trouble is proving it's false. And Mott knows that. He knows a lie's cheap to tell and dear to disprove. So what do we do?" Della folded the paper back along its creases. "We do what you can't do when you're scared," she said. "We slow down. We read. Every line, every record, every signature, all the way back to whoever first put that ground on a map. Somewhere in there is the truth. And the truth's got a paper trail, same as the lie does. We just have to want it badly enough to go looking." She looked up at him. "Most folks don't. That's what men like Mott count on. They count on you being too tired and too scared to read the fine print. so we read the fine print. We read it till our eyes bleed. That was the spring of the second hard thing. It happened the way the worst things do on an ordinary day, with no warning at all. A wagon came clattering up the road near dusk, driven too fast, and on the seat was a man Della half knew from town, white-faced and shaking. "It's my sister-in-law," he said. "Her time's come and it's gone wrong, and the doc's out at the Hadley place, and won't be back till morning, and there's nobody." "There's nobody, ma'am, and somebody said you'd birthed babies before I have." Della was already pulling off her apron. "Where is she?" "In the wagon." The man's face twisted. "We had to folks wouldn't have her in town. She's not married, ma'am." "The babies, there's no husband." "The church ladies said." "I don't care what the church ladies said." Della was up in the wagon bed before he finished. There was a girl back there, hardly more than a girl, gray and slick with sweat, and Della took one look and knew it was bad. "Get her in the house," she said. Now, it was a long night. Della had birthed a dozen babies in her time, in a dozen poor houses, and she knew the difference between a hard birth and a losing. This was a losing one. The girl had been laboring 2 days. Already, by the time her kin worked up the nerve to bring her anywhere, and she'd been turned from 3 doors before the Calder place because of the ring she didn't wear. Della worked through the night. She did everything she knew. She got the baby out. Finally, near dawn, a girl, small but breathing, squalling thin into the gray light. The mother didn't last the morning. She held the baby once. She looked at Della with eyes already going far away, and she said, "Don't let them put her in a home. Please, don't let them." And Della said, "I won't. I promise you, I won't." And the girl believed her, because Della meant it, and a person can tell the difference. Then she was gone. The kin didn't want the baby. They made that plain. A child born wrong, they called it. A shame on the family. They'd come for the body and not the daughter. So Della kept her. She named her Grace, because the girl who died had said no name, and because it was a thing Della wanted true in the house, that this child, that the one nobody wanted, the one called a shame before she was a day old, would walk through her whole life carrying a word that meant given freely, deserved or not. The town talked, of course. The town always talked. They said the Barren woman had taken to collecting other people's sins now. They said you could tell a household by the company it kept. And look at the company the Calders kept in Indian: 2 freed black children, a deaf girl, and now a bastard. Della heard it. She walked into the square one market day and heard 2 women say it nearly to her face. Soft, the way cruelty is always soft, so it can claim it meant nothing. She stopped. She turned around. "Say it to me," she said, not loud. The square went quiet around her. "If you've got something to say about the children in my house, you say it to my face, not to the back of my neck." The women colored and looked at the ground. "I'll tell you something," Della said, to them and to the whole listening square. "There is no such thing as a child born in sin. There's no such thing. A baby comes into this world clean as morning, every single one. And what happens to it after is on the grown people standing around it. The sin isn't in the cradle. The sin is in the folks who look at a cradle and decide there's a child in it not worth saving." She let that ring out. "You want to find sin in my house? You go on looking. You won't. What you'll find is children who were thrown away, and a table big enough to hold them. That's all. That's the whole of it." She picked up her basket and walked out of that square, and nobody said a word. But one man, standing at the edge of it, heard every bit of it and went home troubled. That was Doc Pruitt. Pruitt came out to the ranch a week later. He was an old man, and a tired one, and he sat at Della's kitchen table turning his hat in his hands the way nervous men do. "I delivered that girl's baby right," he said. "I want you to know that's not why I came. You did fine. Better than fine." He stopped. "I came because I heard what you said in the square about children, and it's been at me." He looked up. "Mrs. Mercer, or Mrs. Calder, I should say, when you were married to Porter, Emmett Porter. Do you recall a doctor signing a paper saying that you couldn't have children?" Della went very still. "I recall it. I've carried it my whole life. It's why I went to that auction with a price already lowered on my head." Pruitt's old face creased. "I never examined you," he said quietly. "Not once. Not ever. He set his hat down. Porter came to me years back. Paid me well to sign a paper saying I had. Said it was a private family matter. Said his wife was barren, and he needed it down in writing. He couldn't meet her eyes. I was younger. I needed the money. I told myself it was a small thing. A piece of paper, what harm? I have been ashamed of it for 15 years, and I never said a word, because saying it would cost me, and I let the cost to me weigh heavier than the cost to you. He finally looked up. I'm sorry. It's late, and it's worth nothing, but I'm sorry. There was never a thing wrong with you. I'd swear it in any court you like. The kitchen was silent. Della sat with it. 15 years. 2 marriages. A lifetime of standing on auction blocks while men called her empty. Built on a paper, a frightened doctor signed for cash. Why, she said. Her voice came out steady, which surprised her. Why would Porter pay to call his own wife Barren? I think, Pruitt said slowly, because the fault was his, not yours. A man like that, he couldn't be the one who'd fail, so he made it you. On paper, where it'd follow you and never follow it. Della closed her eyes. When she opened them, there were no tears in them. She was past tears for Emmett Porter. You'll write that down, she said. Everything you just told me. Signed and witnessed and dated. Will you do that? I will. Pruitt nodded. I should have done it 15 years ago. You're doing it now. Della stood, and she did a thing she didn't expect to do. She put her hand on the old man's shoulder. It cost you to come out here and say that. I know it did. Most folks never pay that cost. They carry the lie to the grave because it's lighter than the truth. She pressed his shoulder once. You set it down. That's worth more than 15 years of carrying it pretty. After he left, she stood at the window a long time. On the mantel, the silver dollar sat in its tin cup. Barren, the word that had set her price, and it had never been true. Not one day of her life. She didn't know yet what to do with that, but she knew the lie was breaking. She could feel it breaking, like ice on the creek in spring slow, and then all at once. Della fell sick in the early summer. It came on slow. A tiredness she couldn't shake. A turning in her stomach in the mornings. She kept on her feet. She always kept on her feet, but Amos saw it. And Amos worried, and Amos was not a man who hid worry well, for all that he hid everything else. You're going to see Pruitt, he said one morning, in a voice that wasn't asking. I'm fine. You're gray as ash, and you didn't touch your breakfast. You're going to see Pruitt if I have to carry you. And I can. He set down his cup. Please. I lost one wife to not paying attention soon enough. I won't lose another to her own stubbornness. That last part got through where the rest hadn't. Della went. Pruitt examined her properly. This time, the way he should have done 15 years before for another man. And when he was done, he sat back, and the strangest look came over his old face. Well, he said. Well, what? Della's heart had gone cold. Say it plain. I've had enough of doctors and their careful word. Miss Calder. Pruitt almost laughed. He caught himself. You're not sick. You're with child. The room went very quiet. That's not possible, Della said. It's not only possible. It's plain. 3 months along, near as I can tell. He shook his head, slow wondering. I told you there was never anything wrong with you. I meant it as comfort. I didn't know how true it'd turn out. He looked at her with something close to awe. The barren woman. There was never any such woman. There was only a lie and a frightened man who told it. And you, carrying it all these years for nothing. Della put her hand flat on the table to steady herself. 34 years old. Twice married. No children of her own blood. Called empty in front of whole rooms full of men. And here, in a house full of children, she'd gathered, like a hen gathers chicks, in a marriage that started at $1, her own body was doing the thing every doctor and every husband and every whispering church lady had sworn it could never do. She started to laugh. Then it turned, the way it does, and she put her face in her hands. And Pruitt had the grace to look out the window while she did it. You all right? He asked, after. No, she said, wiping her face. Yes, she laughed again, wet. I don't have a word for what I am. She told Amos that night, at the kitchen table, after the children were down. He was working through the land papers. By lamplight they did it. Every evening now, the two of them, reading the fine print till their eyes blurred, hunting the truth in Mott's mountain of lies. He had his big finger on a line of some old survey when she said it. Amos, set that down a minute. He set it down. Pruitt examined me today. She made herself say it slow, so he wouldn't fear the worst before she got to the best. I'm not sick. A breath. I'm going to have a baby. Amos didn't move. For a long moment, he just looked at her, the lamplight gold on the side of his face, and she watched the words go into him and find no place to fit because there'd never been a place built for them. They said you couldn't, he said finally. Soft. They said a lot of things. A man paid a doctor to say them. Della reached across the table and took his hand, the way he'd taken hers so many times. There was never anything wrong with me, Amos. There was only a lie, and I'm done living inside it. Amos looked down at her hand in his. And then this great mountain of a man, who'd spent 40 years being looked at as a thing to lift and carry, who'd been called nothing but his size. His whole life, this man put his head down on the kitchen table, and his shoulders shook. And Della came around and held as much of him as her arms could reach, and neither of them said anything for a long while, because there was nothing that needed saying. The baby came in the fall, on a cold, bright morning. A girl, they named her Eve. It was a hard birth. Pruitt stayed the whole night and into the next day, and there was an hour near the end when his face went tight and he stopped talking, and Amos sat on the bottom stair, with his hands hanging between his knees, which was the closest that man ever came to praying. But Della was strong, and the baby was strong, and they both came through it. When Pruitt finally came down and said, "Mother and child, both well," Amos didn't speak. He just gripped the old doctor's hand hard enough to hurt and went up the stairs, 2 at a time. Big as he was, he stood in the doorway of the room, the way he always did. At the edge of the thing, he wasn't sure he had the right to come into. Della looked up at him from the bed, the baby in her arms. "Come in," she said. "She's yours, too." He came in and sat on the edge of the bed, and she laid the baby in his arms. And Della watched his face do the thing it had done the day she told him, open. Like a door that had been swollen shut for years, finally giving. "She's got your hands," Amos said. "She's got enormous hands," Della said. "I'm not sure that's a compliment. It is where I come from." Down the hall, the other 5 were waiting. Sam, Tess, and Cale, and Junie, and Grace asleep in Nell's arms. 5 children who'd had nobody. Standing outside a door, waiting to meet the new one. "Bring them in," Della said. "All of them. They should meet their sister." And the door opened, and the children came crowding in, careful and wide-eyed. And Tess signed something, both arms up tall, then down soft, cradling the big man. Small, her own sign for baby. Invented, right there on the spot, and the whole room understood it without a word. 6 children, then in the house, at the end of the dollar. And Doc Pruitt, watching from the doorway, thought about a paper he'd signed 15 years before, and about how the cruelest lie a man can tell is the one that makes a person believe they're less than they are, and how the only thing that ever breaks a lie like that is the plain, stubborn truth said out loud, in a court if it has to be, but said he'd say it. He'd already started writing it down, because the lie wasn't just Della's anymore. It was about to walk into a courtroom, and the truth was going to be waiting there for it. Mott made his move on a dry night in late summer. Della woke to the smell first. Smoke, where there shouldn't be smoke. She was up and at the window before she was fully awake, and what she saw woke her the rest of the way. The hay barn was burning. Orange light leapt and crawled up the timbers, and the whole yard was lit with it. Ugly and bright. Amos, he was already moving. He took the stairs in 3 steps and was out the door, pulling on his boots, and the hands came tumbling out of the bunkhouse. And for an hour, it was nothing but chaos, buckets, and shouting, and the scream of frightened horses, and the heat of it pressing on everyone's faces. Like an open oven door. They saved the horses. They saved the house. The barn they lost, and most of the season's hay with. By dawn, it was a black ruin, smoking against a pale sky, and the family stood in the yard gray with ash, and Amos was bleeding from a gash along his arm where a falling beam had caught him. Della wrapped it tight. Her hands didn't shake this time. There wasn't room for shaking. There was only the next thing to do. And then the thing after that. That was no accident, Otis said. He was looking at the barn, at the way it had gone up. Hey, don't catch like that on its own. Somebody helped it. Mott, Amos said. Can't prove it. No, Amos said. We can't. The paper came 2 days later, while the barn was still smoking. It wasn't about the land this time. It was worse. Della read it twice before she could make herself believe it. He's petitioning the court, she said, to take the children. Amos went white under the soot. He can't. He says he can't. Read it. Della's voice was flat and hard. He says this home is unfit. He lists them out, Amos, one by one. An Indian child kept against the agency's wishes. 2 Negro children with no papers. A deaf girl, a bastard, and her jaw set. A mother declared barren and of questionable character. He's using every cruel thing this county ever said about us. And he's dressed it up in a court filing, and he's asking a judge to scatter our children to the winds, the agency, the poorhouse, wherever. She set the paper down. He couldn't break us with fire, so he's going to try and break us with the law. The kitchen was very quiet. Down the hall, the children were eating breakfast, not knowing. He thinks we're alone, Della said slowly. That's what he keeps saying. Isn't standing. Who'll stand with you when the storm comes? He's been telling us for 2 years that we've got nobody. She looked up. We'll find out if he's right. It was Tess who changed everything. She'd been quiet since the fire, quieter than usual, which Della had laid to the fright of it. But that evening, sitting on the porch step, Tess tugged Della's sleeve and wouldn't stop until Della knelt down and gave the girl her whole attention. Then Tess began to sign. Fast, urgent, her small hands flying. Della watched, and slowly, the blood drained out of her face. Amos. She didn't take her eyes off the girl's hand. Amos, come here. Now he came. She saw it, Della said. The fire. She was at the window. She couldn't sleep. Della's voice was tight. Slow down, baby. Show me again. Show me slow. Tess showed her again. 2 men. Coming in the dark to the barn. One carrying something. Tess made the sign for fire, then for pour, tipping an invisible can. And the men's faces. Tess didn't have name, but she had something better. She signed a hat, a big hat, brushed wide, and then she pointed off down the road toward the Mott place. And she made the sign, the household, used for Mott himself, the one they'd never taught her, but she'd watched them make. A soft, smiling mouth, 2 fingers curling like something false. She knows them, Della breathed. She watched them set the fire and ride off, and she knows where they rode. Amos, she's a witness. The one child everybody in this county rode off as good for nothing. She's the only one who saw. Amos crouched down in front of the girl, this huge man folding himself small to be at her level. He didn't know many signs, but he knew one. He put a flat hand to his chest, then held it out to her, palm up. Thank you. Tess looked at his big, rough hand. Then she put her own small hand in it. Folks said this child couldn't do anything, Della said quietly. Couldn't hear, so she couldn't learn, couldn't matter. They had her whole life decided before she'd lived a day of it. She looked at the girl, then at the man holding her hand. And here, she is about to save this whole family, the one they threw away. Her voice caught. There's no such thing as a person who doesn't matter, Amos. There never was. There's only folks too lazy to find out how. The hearing was held in the county courthouse in Calhoun Flats, and the whole town came. They came to watch the Calders go down. That was the truth of it. They came the way folks come to watch a barn burn. Half horror, half hunger. They filled the benches and lined the walls, and Cyrus Mott sat at the front in his good coat with his lawyer beside him, and that soft smile on his face, certain as Sunday. Della and Amos sat at the other table with the children behind them in a row. Sam holding Tess's hand, Cale with his arm around Junie, Nell with Grace, and Eve asleep against Della's shoulder. The judge was a dry old man named Harlow, brought in from 2 counties over, which Mott had counted on a stranger with no stake, who'd read the filing and see exactly what Mott wanted him to see. A pile of children who didn't fit. Mott's lawyer stood and laid it all out. Smooth and sorrowful. An unfit home. A questionable woman. A collection of unfortunates kept for show. He read the old certificate aloud, medically confirmed barren, and let it hang in the air like a smell. Your Honor, he said, these are not this woman's children. Not one of them is hers by blood. They were gathered up. One has to ask why a barren woman of dubious history surrounds herself with other people's discarded offspring. It is not natural. It is not stable. These children deserve proper placement. He sat down, satisfied. The judge looked over his spectacles at Della. Mrs. Calder, you may answer. Della stood, but she didn't speak first. Your Honor, she said, before I say anything, there's testimony you need to hear. From a witness to the fire that burned our barn, the same week this petition was filed. Mott's lawyer was on his feet. Your Honor, there's no witness listed. There is now, Della said. She's 8 years old, and she's deaf, and I'll interpret her testimony, which the court can verify against the marks on the cattle. And the empty oil cans, I'll wager, are still behind Mr. Mott's smokehouse. The room stirred. Tess came up, small and straight back. The whole courtroom stared at the child. Everyone had called simple, and the child looked back at them, unafraid, and began to sign. Della spoke it as the small hands moved, the two men in the dark, the oil, the fire, the wide-brimmed hats, the ride-off toward the Mott place. Della's voice was steady and clear, and the courtroom went from murmuring to dead silent, because there is nothing on God's earth quieter than a room full of people watching a thrown-away child tell the truth that the powerful man had bet his whole case on no one ever telling. Mott's smile was gone. Then Doc Pruitt stood up in the gallery, uninvited, and said, Your Honor, while we're hearing testimony, nobody wanted. I've got some to give about that paper, the one that says she's barren. His old voice shook, but didn't stop. I signed it 15 years ago. For money, I never examined that woman in my life. Emmett Porter paid me to call his wife empty so the failing wouldn't land on it. It was a lie. I've got it written, signed, and witnessed, and I'll hand it up right now. He looked at Mott. Porter was your brother. I expect you knew it all along. The courtroom erupted. Judge Harlow banged his gavel, and slowly the room came back to order, and into the quiet, Amos Calder stood up. He'd never spoken before a crowd in his life. The mountain. The man folks measured by his shoulder. He stood there, huge and plain, in his one good coat, and he turned his hat in his hands once, and then he set it down on the table and left it there. I'm not good with words, he said, so I'll just say the true thing. He looked at the judge, and then he looked out at the whole town that had spent 2 years whisper. You folks have got a habit of pricing people by their blood, by their color, by what they can or can't bear, by what some scared man wrote on a paper years back. His voice was low, but it carried to every corner. I did it too, once. Let myself believe I was just a back to lift things with, because that's all anybody ever told me I was. It's a lie. It's the oldest, ugliest lie there is, that a person's worth is set by something other than the person. He put his big hand on the table. Those 7 souls behind me, 6 children, and the woman I married, they're mine. Not because of blood, not because of paper, because we chose each other. Every single ordinary morning, we chose each other. That's the only thing that ever made a family in the whole history of the world, choosing. And nobody in this room, nor any judge, is going to unchoose it for us. He sat down. Judge Harlow looked at him a long moment. Then he looked at the signed confession in his hand, and at the small, deaf girl still standing brave by the rail, and at Cyrus Mott, who would not meet anyone's eyes. The petition is denied, Harlow said, and Mr. Mott, you'll remain. The county's got some questions for you about a fire. The 7th child came in the spring, 8 years after a man bid $1 in a feed store. Della was older now, and Pruitt was honest with her. This birth would be harder, and not without danger, on account of what Eve's birth had taken out of her. But Della had never once in her life run from a hard thing, because it was hard. Difficult isn't the same as impossible, she told Amos the night her time came near. I taught Tess that. I'd be a poor sort of teacher if I didn't believe it myself. It was a long night, and a frightening one. Amos sat on the bottom stair again, hands hanging between his knees, and this time the older children sat with him, Sam near grown now, an arm around little Grace, Cale and Junie close. Eve nodded against her father's huge shoulder, and Tess, who watched the stairs with those sharp eyes that missed nothing. Near dawn, Pruitt came down. His old face was wet, but he was smiling. "A boy," he said. Both fine." Amos went up the stairs. The whole brood went up behind him. The baby was small and red and furious. Della was pale and worn through, but her eyes were clear. And when Amos came to the doorway and stopped at the edge of it the way he always had, the way he always would, she looked up and said the same words she'd said the first time. "Come in. He's yours, too." They named him Noah. 7 children. 5 gathered, 2 born. And not one of them, Della would tell you, more hers than any other. The heart doesn't keep that kind of ledger. She'd looked, and it didn't. The years went on the way years do. The town came around the way towns do, once the brave thing has been done by somebody else first and proven safe. Agnes Durant learned to sign and grew fierce about it. And woe to anyone who called Tess simple in her hearing. Reverend Hollis married off 2 of the children in time, in that same church where he'd once preached to a silent room. Mott left the county in disgrace and didn't come back. The 43 acres stayed called, clear titled, because Della had read the fine print till her eyes bled and found the truth waiting in it, just like she'd said she would. Sam went off to study the law and came back, and spent his life working for the people the county had once tried to ship north. Tess opened a little school and taught deaf children for 40 years that the silence was never in them. It was only ever in a world too lazy to learn their language. Cale ran the ranch's books better than anyone before him. Junie nursed. Grace, the one called a sin before she could speak, grew up to be the gentlest soul any of them ever knew. Even Noah grew tall and stubborn and kind. And on the mantel, in a tin cup, the silver dollar stayed. Noah found it one day when he was small. He brought it to his mother, all wonder, and asked what it was. Della took him on her knee. The house was warm around them, full of the noise of a big family living its life. "That," she said, "is the most foolish thing anybody ever spent money on. And the smartest. Folks looked at me once and decided I was worth less than $1. Your father was the only man in the room who knew better." She turned the coin over in her finger. "But here's the thing I want you to hold on to, Noah. Your whole life, the dollar was never the point. A person was never a thing to be bought. Not for $1, not for 1,000. The trick your father knew, the only trick that matters, is that you look at a person and you see the whole of them, not their blood, not their color, not what some scared man wrote on a paper, the whole person." She closed his small hand around the coin. "You do that, and you'll never be poor a day in your life, no matter what's in your pocket." Noah looked at the dollar in his fist. "They said you couldn't have babies," he said. "The way children say the blunt, true thing. They did." Della laughed. "And I have 7. Both of those things are true in their way." She kissed the top of his head. "But only one of them ever mattered. Can you guess which?" Noah thought hard. "The 7, he said. She agreed. That night, like every night, the table was full. 8 years gone since a cold morning in a feed store, and every chair at it taken, and a small one at the end, the first one Amos ever built, where the newest of them always sat right at the head where everyone could see, where nobody in that house ever ate in the corner."
The opinions, actions, and decisions expressed by the characters in this story do not reflect the views or beliefs of the author. Certain scenes may contain dramatic situations, emotional conflict, or morally complex behavior intended solely to serve the fictional storyline and enhance the audience's viewing experience. When we first met Della Mercer, the world had already decided what she was worth. A room full of strangers looked at a woman who could not give them what they valued most, and they reduced her entire life to a single cruel word. They measured her by a lie, by an assumption, by something they believed she lacked. Yet the greatest lesson of this story is that human worth has never been measured by what a person can produce, possess, or provide. It is measured by who they are when no one is watching, by the kindness they offer when kindness costs something, and by the courage they show when the world tells them they do not matter. Understood that truth long before anyone else did. He saw what so many people fail to see. He looked beyond labels, beyond rumors, beyond the judgments of a fearful community. He saw a human being standing alone, and he chose dignity over convenience. In a world that constantly tried to put a price on people, Amos made a simple but revolutionary choice. He treated a person as priceless. That choice changed everything. As the years passed, we learned that family is not created by blood alone. Family is built through love, loyalty, sacrifice, and the daily decision to stand beside one another. Sam, Tess, Cale, Junie, Grace, Eve, and Noah each arrived through different roads of pain and loss. Some were abandoned, some were rejected, some were told they would never belong anywhere. Yet, under the Calder roof, they discovered a truth many spend their entire lives searching for. Belonging is not something you earn, it is something that is given. This story also reminds us how dangerous lies can be. One false document stole years from Della's life. One selfish man's pride convinced an entire community that she was less than she truly was. But lies, no matter how powerful they seem, cannot survive forever against the steady force of truth. Truth may move slowly. It may take years to uncover. It may require courage, patience, and sacrifice. Yet eventually, truth finds daylight. Perhaps the most powerful lesson comes through the children. Sam taught us that a child without a home still carries limitless potential. Tess taught us that disability is not inability, and that sometimes the people society overlooks are the very people capable of saving everyone else. Grace taught us that no child is born carrying shame. Cale and Junie taught us resilience. Eve and Noah reminded us that miracles often arrive after hope seems lost. Every one of them stood as living proof that people are never defined by where they start. They are defined by what love helps them become. And perhaps that is why the silver dollar remained on the mantle all those years. It was never a symbol of a purchase, it was a symbol of a choice. A choice to see the whole person. A choice to reject prejudice. A choice to believe that every human life carries equal value. The world will always have people like Cyrus Mott, people who divide others by race, by status, by ability, by wealth, by gender, or by the mistakes of the past. But it will also have people like Amos and Della Calder, people willing to open a door, pull up another chair to the table, and make room for one more soul. In the end, the true wealth of the Calder family was never their land, their cattle, or their sucks. Their greatest treasure was the family they built. Through compassion, they proved that a house becomes a home, not because of the people born inside it, but because of the people welcomed into it.